often remembered through stories of knights in shining armor and heroic victories. But the reality for most soldiers was far darker. Wounds were not just about blood and steel on the battlefield. They were about infection, crude surgery, broken bodies, and the silent suffering that followed men long after the fighting was done. From training accidents that left scars before a soldier ever saw combat, to brutal battlefield injuries and the harsh neglect of common infantry, the lives of the wounded reveal a side of history rarely told. This is the brutal truth about wounded medieval soldiers. You won't believe how much pain and hardship was hidden behind the myths of chivalry and glory. Number 1. Training wounds before the battle. Long before steel met flesh in real combat, bodies were already paying a price. Drill yards produced their own casualties. Splinters from pell posts lodged in palms, knuckles split open by blunted edges, and wrists sprained from hours of cutting drills with practice swords that were heavier than they looked. Squires learned the lance against the quinton, and when the counterweight whipped back, it punched shoulders and ribs hard enough to bruise for weeks. A mistimed couching jarred the collarbone and neck, leaving headaches that lingered through the season. Jousting practice multiplied the risk falls from the saddle, stunned riders inside their helmets, while a broken lance drove shock through the arms and into the spine, the kind of impact that never quite let the back forget. Wrestling and dagger play, standard parts of knightly training, meant jammed fingers, torn ligaments, and noses broken on hard-packed earth. Archery ranges carried their own quiet damage. Repetitive draws carved deep grooves in shoulders and upper backs, and swollen fingers told on longbowmen even when the bowstring wasn't singing. Chainmail and padded gambesons saved lives, but rubbed raw at the neck and under the arms. Sweat and grit trapped under fabric raised rashes that turned to infections if left to fester on campaign. Shields hammered the forearm with every parry, so bone-deep bruises collected along the ulna. The hand behind the boss went numb after a day's work, and sometimes stayed that way. Poorly fitted helms bit into the brow and pinched the jaw, turning long drills into a test of pain tolerance. A shifted visor narrowed vision just enough to invite an accidental strike from a sparring partner. Horses added their share, saddle rubs, crushed toes in the stable, and the occasional kick that ended a future on the field before it began. None of this earned glory. It was the slow grind of preparation scar tissue forming in elbows, stiffness setting into hips, and a constant calculation of what hurt enough to rest versus what had to be ignored to keep pace with the yardmaster's bark. Number 2. The armor that wounded its wearer. Armor in the Middle Ages was never a simple shield against danger. It was also a source of pain and long-term harm for the men who wore it. Chainmail, made from thousands of interlinked rings, weighed anywhere from 10 to 20 kilograms and pressed constantly into the shoulders and back. When worn for days on campaign, it rubbed raw spots under the arms, across the chest, and along the neck. Sweat and grit worked their way under the fabric lining, producing sores that often turned septic. Soldiers tried to pad their armor with linen or wool, but constant friction still cut into the skin. Plate armor, which appeared in the later Middle Ages, distributed weight more evenly, yet still placed enormous strain on the hips, lower back, and knees. Prolonged marches left men limping, their joints swollen from carrying an extra 25 to 35 kilograms of metal alongside weapons and supplies. The problem grew worse in hot climates. A knight sealed inside a steel harness under the summer sun could find his body overheating within minutes. Chroniclers recorded cases of men collapsing during tournaments or battles not from wounds but from exhaustion and heat stroke, sometimes suffocating inside helmets that trapped heat and sweat. Helmets themselves carried their own risks. While they guarded the skull, they restricted hearing and narrowed vision, turning the battlefield into a blur of muffled noise and narrow sight lines. In the crush of melee combat, soldiers often stumbled into blows they never saw coming. Even without a blade breaking through, blunt trauma seeped through the armor. A mace strike or warhammer blow could dent steel inward, cracking ribs, crushing collarbones, or causing concussions that lingered long after the fight. Many knights removed their gear at day's end, only to find their bodies mapped with purple bruises, sprains, or even fractures hidden under the rush of adrenaline. Prolonged use left its mark too. spinal compression, chronic back pain, and permanently damaged joints plagued veterans who had carried armor through years of campaigning. In this way, the very technology meant to protect medieval warriors slowly dismantled their bodies from within, leaving them scarred not just by the enemy, but by the tools of their own defense. Number 3. The fear that lingered. Fear did not end when the trumpets fell silent. It calcified into habits of body and mind that followed soldiers for years. Accounts from monastic scribes and household records point to veterans who startled at loud noises, avoided crowded markets, and woke gasping from sleep, describing visitations and crushing weight in the night that physicians framed as melancholia or an imbalance of black bile. The intellectual tools of the period translated shock into spiritual and humoral language. Acedia for listlessness that ruined prayer and work, choleric excess for sudden rages that spilled into alehouse fights, and evil dreams interpreted as demonic temptation rather than recurring memories